In the northern hills of Thailand, where mist clings to teak forests and dusk arrives too quickly, there are rituals the living perform not for the dead, but for what refuses to leave. They say if a bride dies before her wedding day, her spirit remains bound to the promise she never fulfilled. And if no one agrees to marry her, she will not remain alone. This is the story of Ban Phra Kham, a village where vows continue after death, and where one man returned home to discover that some promises are never buried. Chapter 1. The village that would not look at him. The bus left Anan at the end of a narrow dirt road just before sunset. Beyond that point, Ban Phra Kham was reachable only by foot, a detail he had forgotten in the 10 years he had spent in Bangkok, where noise and neon never allowed silence to settle. Here, silence ruled everything. The air felt thick, unmoving, as if the forest surrounding the village held its breath. Teak trees stood like tall, unmoving sentinels, their trunks darkened by moisture and age. Even the cicadas seemed reluctant to sing. He adjusted the strap of his bag and began walking. With each step, the road narrowed, swallowed slowly by roots and fallen leaves. A smell of damp soil rose from the ground, rich, fungal, and faintly sweet, like something long buried. When the first rooftops appeared, he felt relief. It lasted only a moment. No dogs barked to announce his arrival. No children ran barefoot through the dust. No cooking smoke curled into the evening sky. The village lay in a strange stillness, as if time had paused and forgotten to resume. A woman sweeping her doorway stopped when she saw him. The broom froze mid-stroke. Her eyes widened, not in recognition, but in something closer to fear. She lowered her head and retreated inside without a word, sliding the wooden door shut with a soft, hurried thud. Another man carrying firewood stepped aside to let Anan pass. The man did not look at him. Instead, he stared fixedly at the ground, lips moving in a silent chant. Anan felt a chill move across his shoulders. He told himself it was grief. He had returned to bury his mother. Villages were quiet when death visited. People avoided eye contact out of respect. That was all. At the small shrine near the banyan tree, he stopped to light incense for safe passage, a habit his mother had insisted upon when he was a boy. The incense smoke rose straight upward, perfectly vertical, as though the air refused to disturb it. Before he could place the sticks in the ash bowl, a brittle voice spoke behind him. "You should not have come today." He turned. An old incense seller sat cross-legged beside a wooden tray of offerings. Her skin hung in folds like melted wax, and her eyes were clouded yet piercing. He did not remember her from his childhood. "I came for my mother's funeral," he replied gently. The woman studied him for a long moment, as if measuring something invisible. Then she leaned closer. "The village prepares a wedding tonight," she whispered. Her breath smelled of stale betel nut and smoke. "A wedding?" he asked, confused. Who would marry on a day of mourning? The woman's lips trembled into something that was not quite a smile. "The bride does not breathe." A cold ripple passed through his spine. Before he could ask another question, she turned away and began rearranging incense bundles, dismissing him as if he no longer existed. As Anan walked deeper into the village, he noticed strips of white cloth tied to doorways and spirit houses. At first he mistook them for mourning ribbons, but they were knotted in pairs, symbols of union rather than loss. Wind chimes hung from several eaves, though there was no wind. They chimed anyway. A faint metallic ringing drifted through the air, irregular and hollow, like distant bells submerged underwater. He quickened his pace. His childhood home stood at the far end of the village near the temple grounds. The closer he drew, the more he became aware of another sound beneath the chimes, a low murmur. As if many voices were whispering at once, just beyond comprehension. When the temple roof finally emerged through the trees, he stopped. A white pavilion had been erected in the courtyard. Beneath it stood a red lacquered coffin. Lanterns swayed above it, though the air remained still. Anan felt, without understanding why, that something inside that coffin was not entirely at rest. And for the first time since returning, he realized, no one in the village had welcomed him home. And no one had dared meet his eyes. As the last light drained from the sky, The temple bells rang once, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate inside his chest rather than in the air around him. From somewhere behind the pavilion, a woman began to sob. The sound stopped abruptly. The wind chimes rang again. And the village, as if obeying an unseen command, fell into absolute silence. Anan stood alone at the edge of the temple grounds, gripping his bag, unsure why every instinct in his body urged him to turn around and leave, while something deeper, heavier, and unseen seemed to be waiting for him to stay. Chapter 2. The Bride in the Funeral Pavilion. The temple courtyard smelled of melted candle wax and damp wood. As Anan stepped beneath the white funeral pavilion, the air grew noticeably colder, as though he had crossed an invisible threshold separating the living from something that merely resembled life. Lanterns hung from bamboo poles, their paper skins yellowed with age. They swayed gently, though the air remained unmoving. Each slow creak of rope against wood echoed too loudly in the stillness. At the center of the pavilion rested a red lacquered coffin polished to a dark mirror sheen. Gold patterns traced its edges, curling vines and lotus motifs meant to guide the dead toward peaceful rebirth. Someone had draped a bridal sash across the lid. White jasmine garlands lay in careful loops, already browning at the edges. Behind the coffin stood a framed portrait. Anan felt his breath falter. The young woman in the photograph wore a traditional Thai silk wedding dress, ivory threaded with gold. Her hair was pinned in ceremonial coils, adorned with fresh flowers. Her lips held the faintest suggestion of a smile, not joyful, not mournful, but strangely restrained, as if she had been asked to remain still for too long. Her eyes were wide, not soft, not gentle, wide in a way that suggested she had seen something approach. As Anan shifted his weight, the lantern light flickered across the glass of the frame. For a brief instant, it seemed her gaze moved with him. He stepped to the side. Her eyes followed. A chill crawled along his arms. "You should not stand directly before her," said a voice behind him. Anan turned to see a novice monk, no older than 16, clutching a bundle of incense sticks so tightly his knuckles had turned pale. "Why?" Anan asked. The boy hesitated. His gaze drifted toward the coffin before dropping to the floor. "She is waiting," he murmured. The boy placed incense into the burner and retreated quickly, as though proximity alone carried danger. Anan approached the coffin slowly. He had seen death before: hospital rooms, traffic accidents, cremation halls, but this felt different. This was not a farewell. This was preparation. A faint scent drifted upward from the coffin's seams. Not rot. Not incense. Wet earth. The smell triggered an involuntary memory, digging after monsoon rains as a child, when the soil was soft and dark and cool beneath his fingers. Except this scent felt deeper, older, as though it had risen from far below where roots could reach. He became aware of movement at the edge of the courtyard. Villagers stood beneath the eaves of the temple hall, watching in silence. No one spoke, no one approached. An old man pressed his palms together in prayer when their eyes nearly met. Another woman turned away and covered her mouth. Their fear did not seem directed at the coffin. It was directed at him. A brittle whisper brushed his ear. "Malai." He turned sharply. The incense seller from the shrine stood beside him, though he had not heard her approach. The lines of her face appeared deeper in the lantern light, her skin the color of ash. "That is her name," she said. "What happened to her?" Anan asked. The old woman's cloudy eyes lingered on the portrait. "She was to be married at dawn 3 days ago." Her voice thinned. But the dawn never came for her. A slow creaking sound emerged from the coffin. The old woman fell silent. Lantern light trembled. The rope above them twisted with a dry fiber groan. Anan stared at the lid. He told himself wood contracts in the cold. He told himself lacquer shifts. He told himself many things. Then he saw it. The jasmine garland resting on the coffin slid half an inch toward the edge. No breeze stirred. No one touched it. Behind him, someone began whispering prayers. The temple bell rang once. The sound rolled through the courtyard like distant thunder trapped beneath the earth. At that exact moment, the lantern flames bent inward, as if drawn toward the coffin. Anan's heartbeat thudded in his throat. "Do not remain after dark," the incense seller whispered. "Tonight, she will not sleep." He swallowed. "What happens tonight?" The old woman's lips moved, but for a moment no sound emerged. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely breath. "The bride must be taken to her husband." Anan felt the temperature drop another degree. A thin mist seemed to gather near the ground, curling around the coffin's base like pale fingers searching for purchase. From somewhere deep within the temple hall came a sound, soft, uneven, almost indistinguishable from shifting cloth or breathing. The villagers began backing away. One by one. No one turned their backs to the coffin as they left. Anan remained where he stood, unable to move, unable to look away from the portrait. The bride's eyes shone beneath the lantern light. Not with reflection, but with moisture, as if tears had gathered behind the glass. The bell rope creaked. Wind chimes rang without wind. And the last light of evening drained from the sky, leaving the pavilion suspended in a dim, amber glow that felt less like illumination and more like the inside of a lantern prepared for the dead. Anan realized then, with slow and growing dread, this was not a funeral. It was a waiting room. And the bride was not waiting alone.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 3. The Ritual That Binds the Unfinished. The temple bell did not ring again, yet its vibration seemed to linger inside Anan's chest long after the sound had faded. The villagers had dispersed into the deepening dusk, leaving the courtyard emptied of movement but not of presence. Something remained. Something listening. He did not remember deciding to stay. His feet simply refused to leave the pavilion, as though the packed earth beneath him had thickened into wet clay. Behind the coffin, a door creaked open. Anan turned. An elderly monk emerged from the shadowed temple hall. His saffron robes faded almost to brown. His shoulders were narrow, his spine curved with age, yet his movements possessed a deliberate steadiness, as though each step had been measured long before he took it. His eyes, when they met Anan's, were neither warm nor cold. They were tired. "You have returned at an unfortunate time," the monk said. His voice sounded like dry leaves dragged across stone. Anan bowed slightly. "I came to bury my mother." The monk nodded, but his gaze drifted past Anan to the coffin. "Yes," he murmured, "the living bury the living. But tonight we must marry the dead." A thin thread of cold slid along Anan's spine. They moved to a wooden bench beneath the eaves. The monk lit a single stick of incense. The smoke rose straight upward, undisturbed, forming a pale column between them like a boundary neither man crossed. "What you see here," the monk began, "is not a funeral rite." Anan waited. The monk continued. "When a person dies with vows unfinished, especially vows of union, their spirit does not understand that life has ended. It waits, it calls, it remembers promises the body can no longer fulfill." He paused, listening to the silence, as though ensuring no other ears leaned close. If the spirit is left waiting too long, longing becomes hunger. The word seemed to thicken the air. "Hunger for what?" Anan asked quietly. The monk's eyes lifted to him. "For warmth, for breath, for the life it was promised." A chill passed through the courtyard. Anan glanced toward the coffin. The jasmine garland had slid further, one brittle petal drifting soundlessly to the floor. No one volunteered. The monk continued. Her groom fled before sunrise. By afternoon, the winds began to change. Chickens refused to leave their coops. Milk soured before boiling. A child woke screaming that a woman without feet stood beside his bed. The monk's fingers tightened around his prayer beads. "This is how it begins." The lantern light dimmed slightly, though no flame had gone out. Anan swallowed. "What happens if she is not married?" The monk did not answer immediately. From somewhere beyond the temple wall came the hollow ring of a wind chime. Then another, then silence. At first, the monk said softly, "She will wander. She will appear at doorways. She will stand at the edge of beds. She will call to men using the voices of those they love." His voice lowered further. And when longing rots into rage, she will no longer ask to be taken as a wife. The air seemed to contract. What then? Anan asked. The monk's gaze hardened. Then she takes. The incense burned halfway down, its ash bending but refusing to fall. Anan became aware of the smell again, damp soil rising from the coffin like breath escaping through buried layers of earth. Why me? He asked before he could stop himself. The monk studied him carefully, as though weighing a truth that could not be softened. Because the dead seek what feels familiar. A tremor moved through Anan's hands. You played together as children, the monk said, before your family moved away. She waited for letters that stopped coming. Anan's pulse faltered. Fragments of memory surfaced. A girl laughing beneath monsoon rain, muddy feet, a promise shouted across a flooded field. The memory dissolved before he could grasp it fully. Wood creaked. Both men turned toward the coffin. The lid shifted, barely perceptible, the soft sound of lacquer brushing lacquer. The monk closed his eyes. It is not anger, he whispered, not yet. The lantern flames leaned inward again, thin and elongated, as if drawn toward an unseen center. The ritual must be completed before midnight, the monk said. A ring must be placed upon her finger. Her name must be spoken. A vow must be accepted. And if the vow is broken? Anan asked. The monk's eyes opened. Then she will follow the vow breaker until the promise is fulfilled. The words did not sound like warning. They sounded like certainty. A breeze moved through the courtyard for the first time since sunset. It carried the unmistakable scent of wet earth and crushed jasmine. The incense ash finally fell. At that exact moment, a faint sound emerged from inside the coffin. Not movement. Not breath. A slow, deliberate exhale. Anan felt the sound in his bones rather than his ears. The monk rose. The village will come for you after nightfall, he said. Anan stood as well. I have not agreed. The monk's expression did not change. You have returned. The temple bell rope twisted with a dry fiber groan. In the fading light, the coffin seemed larger than before, its lacquered surface swallowing the lantern glow instead of reflecting it. As Anan stepped back, the mist near the ground thickened, curling around his ankles like cold fingers testing his warmth. He realized, with growing dread, that the ritual was not meant only to bind the dead. It was meant to anchor them to the living. From within the coffin came a faint sound. Soft. Patient. Waiting. Anan turned toward the path leading out of the temple grounds. Darkness had already swallowed it. Behind him, the lantern flames trembled. And somewhere in the deepening night, a woman's voice, thin as breath through soil, whispered his name. Chapter 4. The coffin that answered the dark. Night did not fall over Ban Fra Kham. It settled. Slowly. Heavily, like damp cloth laid across the face of the world. By the time the last strip of twilight vanished behind the teak trees, the temple courtyard had become a basin of shadow and dim lantern glow. The light did not reach far, it seemed to gather close to the ground. As if afraid to rise. Anan remained beneath the pavilion long after the monk disappeared into the temple hall. He told himself he was waiting for the villagers. He told himself leaving in darkness would be disrespectful. But beneath those excuses lay a heavier truth. He did not want to turn his back on the coffin. The smell of wet earth had grown stronger, threading through the scent of incense and wilting jasmine. It was no longer the smell of rain-soaked soil. It was deeper. Like freshly opened ground. Wind chimes rang somewhere beyond the temple wall. No wind followed. The sound lingered in the air, thin and metallic, vibrating inside his ears long after it stopped. Anan checked his phone. No signal. The screen reflected his face, pale, drawn, unfamiliar. Behind his reflection, something pale seemed to shift. He lowered the phone quickly. Nothing stood behind him. A faint scraping sound emerged from the coffin. Not loud. Not sudden. A slow friction, like wood rubbing against wood deep beneath weight. Anan held his breath. The sound stopped. The lantern flame steadied. He exhaled. Then, talk. A single knock from inside the coffin. His spine locked. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. He forced himself to step closer. The lacquered surface reflected warped fragments of lantern light. The jasmine garland now hung halfway off the lid, its petals brittle and browned, as if weeks had passed instead of hours. Another knock. Talk. Talk. Not random. Deliberate. Answering something unheard. From the temple hall came a low murmur, monks chanting evening prayers. The sound should have comforted him, but the rhythm felt uneven, faltering, as though the voices were unsure of the words. The coffin lid trembled. Just once. A thin line appeared where lid met frame. Darkness seeped through the seam. Not emptiness. Depth. Anan's mouth went dry. He took another step forward before realizing he had not chosen to move. A breath brushed his ear. Cold. Damp. He spun around. The courtyard lay empty. Yet the sensation lingered, as though someone stood just behind him. Close enough for their breath to touch his skin. He stepped back toward the coffin without looking at it. That was when the lantern flames leaned inward again, all at once, bending toward the coffin like reeds drawn toward water. The air pressure shifted. His ears popped. And from inside the coffin came a sound that was unmistakable. A slow inhale. Followed by a long, patient exhale. The chanting in the temple hall faltered, then stopped. The silence that followed felt enormous. Anan became aware of a faint movement at ground level. A thin mist crept across the floorboards of the pavilion, pooling around the coffin's base before drifting outward in pale ribbons. The temperature dropped. His breath became visible. Talk. The knock came again. Closer to the lid. A pause. Then a faint dragging sound, as if fingertips moved across the inner surface of the wood. Anan staggered back, his shoulder striking one of the bamboo poles. The lantern above him swayed violently though the air remained still. The rope groaned. Shadows shifted across the coffin lid. For an instant, the gold patterns appeared to ripple like vines moving beneath water. Footsteps approached from the darkness beyond the courtyard. Not one pair. Many. Slow, measured, reluctant. The villagers emerged from the night carrying candles shielded by their palms. No one spoke. Their eyes remained lowered, as though afraid to witness what waited beneath the pavilion. Behind them walked the elderly monk. He did not look at Anan. He looked only at the coffin. "It has begun," he said. His voice barely rose above a whisper. The coffin lid shuddered. The jasmine garland slipped to the floor. No one moved to retrieve it. The mist thickened, coiling around ankles and hems of robes. Anan felt cold seep through his shoes, climbing bone by bone up his legs. Another sound came from inside the coffin. Soft. Almost tender. A slow brushing, like fabric shifting against still flesh. The monk raised his hand. The villagers stopped several steps away, forming a silent half-circle. "Do not fear the knocking," he murmured. "It is only the bride asking to be let out." The lantern flames bent inward once more. The coffin answered with a long, creaking sigh. And Anan understood with rising dread that the night was not waiting for the ritual. The night was waiting for him.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 5. The village chooses the groom. The mist clung to the ground like a living thing, coiling around ankles and hems of robes, seeping into the bamboo floorboards of the pavilion. Candle flames trembled behind cupped hands, casting unsteady halos that turned every face into something hollow-eyed and unfamiliar. No one spoke. The coffin rested at the center of the half-circle, breathing softly in the dim lantern glow. Anan felt the weight of the villagers' silence press against his skin. Not grief. Not fear. Expectation. The elderly monk stepped forward, prayer beads wrapped tightly around his wrist. His shadow stretched across the coffin lid, thin and tremulous, merging with the gold vine patterns etched into the lacquer. "The knocking has begun," he said quietly. "She grows restless." As if summoned by his words. "Talk." A soft knock sounded from inside the coffin. Several villagers flinched but did not raise their heads. The monk continued, voice steady but worn by repetition. "When the dead are denied their vows, Longing festers. Longing becomes hunger. Hunger becomes attachment. Another knock. Talk. Talk. This time the sound was closer to the lid, accompanied by a faint dragging noise, slow, patient, almost gentle. Anan's stomach tightened. A middle-aged man stepped forward, holding a bundle of white ceremonial thread. His hands shook violently. "No one from her fiancé's family remains," he said without looking up. "They left before dawn. Their house stands empty." A murmur passed through the gathered villagers, not surprise, but confirmation of what they already knew. The storms began that same night. Another voice whispered, "Rice stores spoiled. 3 buffalo broke their necks. My son wakes screaming that someone is calling his name from beneath the floor." No one dismissed these claims. No one suggested coincidence. The monk turned toward Anan. The movement was slow, deliberate, inevitable. "She remembers you," he said. The words landed heavier than the night air. Anan shook his head instinctively. "I left when I was a child." She did not. A tremor moved through his chest. Another knock sounded from the coffin, softer now, almost rhythmic, as if keeping time with a heartbeat no longer present. The incense seller stepped from the edge of the crowd. Her clouded eyes glimmered in candlelight. "You ran through the monsoon fields together," she rasped. "You tied reeds into rings and called them wedding bands." Fragments of memory flickered. Mud between his toes, laughter in rain, a girl's voice shouting over thunder. He forced the images away. "That was childhood," he said. The old woman tilted her head. "To the living, yes." A faint sound emerged from within the coffin, not knocking now, but a slow brushing, as though fingertips traced the inner surface of the wood. The monk lifted the white thread. "This rite binds what was promised," he said. "It does not create a marriage. It completes one." Cold slid through Anan's limbs. "I did not promise anything," he said, though the certainty in his voice had begun to thin. The villagers did not look at him. They looked at the coffin. Talk. A single knock. Soft. Patient. Waiting. Wind moved through the courtyard for the first time that night. It carried the smell of damp soil and crushed jasmine. Candle flames bent inward toward the coffin, stretching thin and pale. Anan became aware of a sound beneath the silence. Breathing. Not his. Not the monk's. Slow. Measured. From inside the coffin. The monk stepped closer to him. "If the vow remains unfinished," he said softly, "she will search, not only for you, for warmth, for breath, for the life she was denied." The mist thickened around Anan's feet, cold seeping through his shoes and into bone. "And if I refuse?" he asked. No one answered. The villagers' silence deepened into something heavier than sound. Finally, the incense seller spoke. "If you refuse," she whispered, "she will not." The coffin lid creaked. Not opening. Not yet. But shifting, as though something inside had leaned closer to listen. A faint line of darkness widened along the seam. The jasmine petals on the floor stirred though the air remained still. Anan felt pressure build inside his ears, like the weight of deep water. "She waits," the monk said. Another knock. Talk. Softer now. Almost intimate. Anan realized with a slow, sinking dread that the sound no longer seemed to come from inside the coffin. It sounded nearer, as if the knocking had moved through the wood and into the space between heartbeats. The monk extended the white ceremonial thread toward him. The villagers bowed their heads. The lantern flames shuddered. From within the coffin came a long, fragile exhale, a sound so faint it might have been mistaken for wind slipping through leaves. But there was no wind. Only waiting. And the unbearable certainty that the ritual had already begun long before he returned to the village. Chapter 6. The night before the wedding. They did not wait for his answer. No voice demanded consent. No hand forced his acceptance. Yet as the villagers slowly dispersed into the darkness, the ceremonial thread remained draped over Anan's palms, light as silk and heavy as wet rope. The monk extinguished the pavilion lanterns one by one. With each flame that died, the courtyard seemed to sink deeper into shadow, until only a faint amber glow lingered from the temple hall behind them. The rite begins at midnight. The monk said, "You must rest." Rest. The word sounded misplaced, almost obscene. Anan's childhood home felt smaller than he remembered. The wooden walls exhaled the smell of age and trapped humidity. Dust lay undisturbed along the window frames. Yet the interior felt occupied, not abandoned. Not empty, but paused. As though someone had stepped out moments before his arrival. He placed his bag beside the low bed and sat down. The mattress dipped farther than his weight alone should have allowed. He froze. Slowly, he lifted himself. The indentation remained for several seconds, then eased back into shape. Outside, the night insects were silent. No chirping. No rustle in the grass. Even the wind had withdrawn from the trees. In its place came a faint, irregular tapping. He held his breath. Talk. 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 The sound did not come from the door. Nor from the window. It came from beneath the floorboards. He stood abruptly, stepping back from the center of the room. The wood beneath his feet felt colder in one spot, as if the earth below had thinned. The tapping stopped. Silence returned, thick and suffocating. He lit a stick of incense at the household altar, placing it before the small framed photograph of his mother. The smoke rose straight upward, forming a narrow column that did not waver. "Stay," he whispered to the empty room, unsure whether he spoke to her memory or to himself. The incense tip glowed brighter, then dimmed. Behind him, the floorboards creaked. Not the shifting of old wood. A measured step. He turned. Nothing stood in the doorway. Yet the air held the faint scent of jasmine layered over damp soil. He tried to lie down. Sleep did not come. Instead, memories surfaced unbidden. A girl's laughter beneath monsoon rain. A woven ring made from reeds. A promise shouted across flooded fields and carried away by thunder before he could hear his own reply. The images felt less like recollections and more like something being returned to him. Restored. Claimed. A soft weight pressed onto the bed beside him. The mattress dipped. Slowly. Deliberately. His breath shallowed. The indentation deepened, forming the unmistakable shape of someone lying on their side, facing him. Cold seeped through the thin fabric of his shirt, as though an unseen body radiated winter into his ribs. He could feel the space between them shrinking. Not by movement. By presence. A faint exhale brushed the back of his neck. Wet earth. Crushed jasmine. And something older, sealed too long beneath wood and soil. He sat upright with a violent gasp. The weight vanished. The bed returned to stillness. But the smell remained. From somewhere in the village, a dog howled once, sharp and panicked, before falling abruptly silent. A moment later, wind chimes rang in the distance. No wind followed. Anan rose and stepped outside. Mist drifted low across the ground, pooling between houses and curling around stilts and stairways. The moon hung behind a thin veil of cloud, its light diffused and colorless. Several homes glowed faintly from within, yet no shadows moved behind their paper windows. The entire village felt awake. And listening. He turned toward the temple path. Without fully deciding to, he began walking. Halfway there, he noticed a second set of footprints forming in the dust beside his own. Small. Bare. Appearing one step at a time. Keeping pace. He stopped. The prints stopped. He took another step. A second print appeared beside his. His throat tightened. He did not look behind him. When the temple courtyard came into view, the pavilion stood in darkness, its outline barely visible against the dim sky. Yet he could see the coffin clearly. Though no lanterns burned, its lacquered surface reflected a dull, internal sheen, as if it remembered light. Mist curled around its base like pale fingers. Waiting. The temple bell rang once. The sound did not echo. It sank. As though absorbed by the earth itself. Behind Anan, footsteps stopped. He felt, rather than heard, the presence drawing closer. Not approaching. Arriving. A whisper brushed the edge of his ear, soft as breath through soil. You came back. His chest tightened. The air grew colder. And for the first time, He understood that midnight was not approaching. Midnight was already here.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 7. The Procession Without Music. Midnight arrived without announcement. No rooster stirred. No wind moved through the teak leaves. Even the insects remained silent, as if the night itself had withdrawn to make space for something older. Mist drifted low across the temple grounds, pale and slow-moving, gathering in shallow pools that reflected no light. The pavilion stood in near darkness, yet the red lacquered coffin remained faintly visible, its surface absorbing the dim glow of the cloud-veiled moon. Anan stood at the edge of the courtyard, unable to remember when he had stopped walking. Behind him, the presence lingered, not touching, not speaking, only close enough that the air along his spine remained cold. Then the temple doors opened. The sound was soft, but it traveled across the courtyard with unnatural clarity. Villagers emerged carrying candles shielded in both hands. Their faces were lowered, eyes fixed on the ground before their feet. No one spoke. The silence felt ritualistic, rehearsed, necessary. The elderly monk walked at their head. His lips moved in prayer, though no sound carried from them. Two men stepped beneath the pavilion and placed their hands upon the coffin. They hesitated, not from uncertainty, but from the weight of knowing. The mist thickened around their ankles, curling like slow smoke. "Do not look directly at her face," the monk said quietly. "Guide her home." The men nodded without lifting their eyes. They lifted the coffin. The bamboo floor creaked beneath the weight. Anan felt pressure build in his ears, as if the air itself resisted the movement. The procession began. No drums. No chanting. Only the soft shuffle of bare feet against packed earth. Wind chimes rang somewhere in the distance, thin and irregular, like metal suspended beneath dark water. As the coffin passed Anan, the air around him turned sharply cold. The scent of wet soil deepened, layered now with crushed jasmine and something faintly metallic. The lid shifted. Just once. No one reacted. No one looked up. Anan realized with growing unease that the villagers' calm was not bravery. It was discipline. They circled the temple 3 times. On the first circuit, Anan heard faint tapping from within the coffin, soft, patient, almost polite. On the second, the mist thickened, wrapping around their legs in pale ribbons. Candle flames leaned inward toward the coffin as if drawn by an unseen tide. On the third, the air grew so cold that Anan's breath appeared in thin white clouds. Then he heard it. Breathing. Not from the men carrying the coffin. Not from the villagers. From within the lacquered box. Slow. Measured. Waiting. As they turned the final corner, one of the jasmine garlands slipped from the lid and fell to the ground. It landed without sound. Yet Anan heard the impact in his chest. The procession did not stop. The garland lay in the dust behind them, petals darkening as if absorbing moisture from unseen soil. At the pavilion entrance, the coffin bearers paused. The monk raised his hand. The villagers lowered their candles simultaneously, placing them in a wide circle around the structure. The small flames flickered weakly, their light pooling low rather than spreading outward. The coffin was set upon the platform. Wood met bamboo with a hollow, resonant thud. The mist gathered closer. The air tightened. The monk unwound a length of white ceremonial thread and handed one end to Anan. The thread trembled in his fingers. "She must be shown the path," the monk murmured. "She must know her husband waits." Anan's mouth went dry. "I have not agreed," he whispered. The monk's tired eyes met his. "You returned." Before he could answer, a sound emerged from inside the coffin. Not knocking. Not movement. A long, fragile exhale. The candle flames shuddered. The white thread tightened in his hand. A faint indentation pressed upward against the coffin lid from within, slow. Deliberate, as though unseen fingers tested the barrier between wood and air. The villagers bowed their heads lower. No one breathed. The indentation faded. Silence swelled, enormous and suffocating. Then, from somewhere just behind Anan's shoulder, a whisper rose, soft as breath passing through soil. "I remember the rain." His pulse slammed in his ears. The mist crept closer to his feet. The white thread trembled like a living vein between his fingers. And as the temple bell rang once, deep, dull, swallowed by the earth, Anan understood that the procession had not brought the bride to the pavilion. It had brought her to him. Chapter 8. The Binding Thread. The circle of candles burned low, their flames thin and unsteady, casting light that seemed to sink rather than spread. Shadows pooled beneath the pavilion roof like stagnant water, swallowing the edges of form and depth. Anan stood at the threshold, the white ceremonial thread trembling between his fingers. It was soft as silk, yet it pulsed faintly, as though a slow current traveled through its fibers. The coffin rested before him, silent, listening. The mist had thickened to a pale veil around the platform, drifting in slow coils that never rose above the height of a man's knee. It moved without wind, without direction, only gathering, retreating, and gathering again. The monk motioned for Anan to step forward. His feet obeyed before his mind did. Up close, the lacquered coffin no longer reflected light. Instead, it seemed to absorb it, its surface darkening toward something deeper than red, the color of clay soaked through with rain. Gold vine patterns traced across the lid in looping curves. For a moment, Anan thought he saw them shift, like roots searching through soil. He blinked. They were still. A faint scent rose from the seam of the lid. Wet earth. Crushed jasmine. And beneath it, the metallic trace of something sealed too long. The monk took the thread and wound it once around Anan's wrist. Then extended the remaining length toward the coffin. Union must be guided, he murmured. Without the thread, the spirit may lose the path. His fingers hovered over the lid before withdrawing. Call her, he said. The air tightened. Anan swallowed. His throat felt dry, constricted. He stared at the coffin, at the narrow seam where darkness waited behind polished wood. Nothing moved. Yet he felt watched. From within. From behind. From somewhere that knew the shape of his breath. Malai, he whispered. The name left his mouth like a breath returning to a place it had once belonged. The candle flames bent inward. The mist curled tighter around the platform. The thread in his hand quivered. From inside the coffin came a soft, deliberate brushing sound, like fabric shifting against still flesh. He hesitated. The monk's voice drifted toward him, barely louder than the mist. Again. His pulse thudded in his ears. Malai. A faint indentation pressed upward beneath the lid, slow, tentative, as though unseen fingers tested the barrier between wood and air. Several villagers trembled visibly, but none raised their heads. The indentation faded. The brushing sound continued. Patient. Waiting. Once more, the monk whispered. The white thread tightened slightly around Anan's wrist. He felt a coldness slide along its length, traveling toward him. His lips parted. Malai. The final syllable had barely left his mouth when the coffin answered. A long, fragile exhale seeped through the seam. The sound did not belong to lungs. It belonged to something remembering how to breathe. The candle flames shuddered violently. Several nearly extinguished before straightening again. The mist rose higher, brushing the edge of the platform. And then, slowly, so slowly it seemed less like motion and more like time thickening, the coffin lid shifted. Not opening. Not yet. But loosening. Wood whispered against wood. A sound intimate enough to feel inside the bones. Anan's grip tightened on the thread. The cold traveling through it deepened, moving into his wrist, his forearm, his chest, not freezing, but hollowing, as though warmth were being carefully removed rather than stolen. Behind him, a woman sobbed once and stifled the sound beneath her palms. The monk began chanting under his breath, the words low and uneven, like fragments remembered rather than recited. The lid lifted a fraction of an inch. Darkness filled the seam. Not emptiness. Depth. Something touched the underside of the wood from within. A faint, upward pressure. Then stillness. The thread tugged once in Anan's hand. A gentle pull. As if someone on the other end had taken hold. His breath caught. The mist swirled. The candle flames bent inward again. and from the narrow opening came the scent of rain-soaked soil and crushed jasmine. Fresh and immediate, as though the earth itself had opened beneath the pavilion. A whisper formed beside his ear. Not carried through air. Felt. I waited. His heart slammed against his ribs. The thread tightened further, a living line binding flesh to darkness. The lid creaked another fraction upward. Inside, something pale shifted beneath layers of white cloth. Anan could not see clearly. Yet he knew, with a certainty that did not belong to sight, that the bride was no longer lying still. The monk's chant faltered. The mist climbed higher. The candles burned shorter. The thread pulsed between his fingers. And as the coffin lid lifted the width of a breath, Anan understood with growing terror that the binding was no longer guiding her toward him. It was guiding him toward her.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 9. The Hand That Accepts the Ring. The coffin lid hovered open the width of a breath. No one moved. Even the mist seemed to pause, suspended mid-curl around the platform as though the air itself feared disturbing what lay within. Anan felt the ceremonial thread tighten again around his wrist. Not pulled. Held. The monk extended a small lacquer tray toward him. Upon it rested a gold ring darkened by age, its surface etched with tiny lotus petals worn smooth by handling. Complete the vow, the monk murmured. She must be received. Anan's fingers would not close. The cold traveling through the thread had reached his chest now, hollowing the warmth beneath his ribs, replacing it with a strange, cavernous stillness. Another faint exhale seeped from the coffin. The smell of wet earth deepened. He took the ring. It felt heavier than its size allowed. He stepped closer. The narrow opening revealed layered folds of white burial cloth. Beneath them lay a stillness too complete to be mistaken for rest. Yet the thread pulsed in his hand. Alive. Waiting. The monk's chanting had dwindled to a whisper barely distinguishable from breath. Behind Anan, the villagers bowed lower, foreheads nearly touching the bamboo floor. No one wished to witness the moment of acceptance. Place it on her finger, the monk said. The words drifted through the air like something already decided. Anan hesitated at the edge of the platform. The mist brushed his ankles, cold and damp, clinging like submerged silk. He reached toward the opening. The cloth within shifted. Not much. Just enough. A fold sank inward as though displaced by movement beneath. His hand froze. From inside the coffin came a slow, careful sound. Fabric sliding across skin that did not produce warmth. Then, emerging from the darkness beneath the lid, a hand rose. Not abruptly. Not with force. But with the slow deliberation of something remembering motion. The skin was pale, not the pallor of death alone, but the color of wax left too long from sunlight. Faint veins lay beneath the surface like threads of blue ink dissolved in water. Grains of dried soil clung beneath the fingernails. The fingers trembled once. Then opened. Waiting. A woman in the crowd stifled a cry behind her sleeve. The monk did not look up. Anan felt the thread tighten again. The hand remained extended, patient, neither pleading nor demanding. Only waiting. He slid the ring onto the cold finger. The skin felt smooth and dry. Yet as the ring passed over the knuckle, the finger curled. Not reflex. Response. The grip tightened around his own. The contact was not icy as he expected. It was hollow. A cold that did not freeze, but emptied. Warmth flowed from his palm into the unmoving flesh, drawn away in slow, steady currents. His breath shuddered. The thread pulsed. The candle flames bent inward sharply, nearly horizontal, drawn toward the coffin as though pulled by a silent tide. The hand did not release him. Instead, the thumb moved. A slow, uncertain stroke across his skin. Recognition. A sound escaped the coffin, not breath, not voice, but something between them, a fragile vibration as if air moved through a throat long unused. The monk's chant faltered. The mist climbed higher, curling over the platform's edge. Speak the vow, the monk whispered. Anan's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The hand tightened. Not painful. Possessive. The thread around his wrist grew taut, a living vein connecting flesh to darkness. From within the coffin came a faint shifting, cloth settling, weight redistributing, as though the still body beneath had turned its attention toward him. The scent of jasmine intensified, fresh and immediate, layered over damp soil. "I receive you," he whispered hoarsely. The words felt unfamiliar in his mouth, shaped by breath that did not feel entirely his own. The hand stilled. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the fingers tightened once more, firmer this time, sealing the contact. A long, fragile exhale escaped the coffin. The candle flames shrank to thin blue cores. And somewhere deep beneath the temple grounds, a dull resonance answered, like earth shifting to accommodate a new weight. The hand released him. Not abruptly. Reluctantly. It lowered slowly back into the folds of white cloth. The lid did not close. The opening remained, a narrow darkness filled with depth rather than absence. The thread slackened, though it did not fall away. Anan realized his palm still held the imprint of her fingers, a pale outline that faded even as he watched. Behind him, the villagers remained bowed. No one lifted their heads. No one dared confirm what they had heard. The monk's breathing was audible now, shallow and uneven. "It is accepted," he murmured. But his voice carried no relief. Only inevitability. From within the coffin came one final sound. A slow inhalation. Followed by stillness. Yet the air no longer felt empty. It felt occupied. Anan stepped back, the thread trailing between his wrist and the narrow opening. The mist thinned slightly, retreating from the platform. The candle flames straightened. But the cold within his chest remained, a hollow space where warmth had been carefully removed and carried elsewhere. He knew, with a certainty deeper than thought, that the ritual had crossed a threshold from which neither of them could return. And somewhere within the coffin, beneath folds of white cloth and the scent of rain-soaked soil, the bride no longer waited to be received. She had begun to hold. Chapter 10. When the bride opens her eyes. The hand had withdrawn. The coffin lid remained ajar. The air inside the pavilion felt altered, not lighter, not calmer, but occupied in a way that made breathing feel intrusive, as though each inhale borrowed space that belonged to something else. Anan stepped back from the platform. The white ceremonial thread still looped his wrist, trailing into the narrow opening like a pale vein connecting flesh to darkness. The candle flames straightened, yet their light remained dim and low, unable to climb the pavilion's wooden beams. Shadows gathered above them, thick and unmoving. No one spoke. No one lifted their heads. Even the monk remained bowed, his lips moving silently, as though sound itself had become unwelcome. The scent of jasmine deepened. Not the dry sweetness of garlands left too long in heat. Fresh. Crushed. As if blossoms had just been scattered across damp earth. Anan became aware of a subtle shift in the coffin, not movement, but a redistribution of presence. The way air changes when someone stands too close behind you. The thread around his wrist tightened once. A gentle pull. He looked down. It quivered in small, irregular pulses, like breath traveling through it. From within the coffin came the faintest sound, fabric settling against fabric. Then stillness. Then, slowly, the lid creaked upward another fraction. No one touched it. The sound was soft, intimate, lacquer brushing lacquer, yet it filled the pavilion with suffocating clarity. The opening widened. Darkness within did not remain flat. It seemed layered, depth upon depth, as though the coffin contained more space than its dimensions allowed. The mist gathered at the platform's edge, coiling upward in thin strands. A woman sobbed quietly in the crowd before stifling the sound against her sleeve. The monk whispered, barely audible, "Do not meet her gaze unless she seeks yours." The warning settled into Anan's bones before he fully understood it. The cloth inside shifted. Not from disturbance. From intention. A pale shape emerged beneath the layered white fabric, the outline of a shoulder turning. A head tilting slightly, as though orienting toward sound after a long silence. Anan's pulse thudded in his throat. The thread tightened again. A slow inhale drifted from within the coffin, followed by a pause. Then, with agonizing slowness, the cloth near the face sank inward. Eyes opened. They did not snap wide. They did not stare. They opened the way someone wakes from deep sleep, gradual, unfocused, adjusting to the memory of sight. But there was no white to them. Only dark irises, deep and reflective, swallowing the candlelight instead of returning it. For a moment, they looked past him, through him, as if the world of the living existed at a great distance. Then they shifted, and found him. The air pressure changed. Anan felt it first in his ears, then in his chest, as though invisible water pressed inward from all directions. The candle flames leaned toward the coffin. The mist climbed higher, curling over the platform like pale breath. Her gaze did not hold anger, nor sorrow. Only recognition, slow and dawning, like memory surfacing through deep water. The thread pulsed once. Her lips parted. The movement was slight, careful, as if the muscles had forgotten their purpose. A breath escaped. Not drawn from lungs. Formed. Shaped. Carried through a throat unused to sound. Anan. His name emerged fragile and thin, yet it vibrated through the pavilion with unbearable intimacy. His knees weakened. He had not heard that voice in 10 years. Yet it arrived without distortion. Unchanged by death. Unchanged by time. Behind him, the villagers bowed lower, foreheads pressed to the floor. The monk's chant faltered, then ceased entirely. The pavilion filled with silence so complete it seemed to absorb the echo of her voice before it could fade. Her fingers moved beneath the cloth. A slow flex. Testing. Remembering. The ring caught a faint glint of candlelight as her hand lifted slightly, as though rediscovering its weight. Her eyes never left his. The thread tightened. Not pulling. Holding. Binding. Anan felt warmth draining slowly from his chest, drawn along the invisible line between them. It was not painful. It was not violent. It was intimate. A sharing. A recognition of something unfinished. The mist brushed the edge of his feet. Cold seeped through his bones. Her lips parted again, the movement less uncertain now. I waited, she breathed. The words carried the scent of rain-soaked soil and crushed jasmine. The coffin creaked softly as her head tilted another fraction toward him. Not rising. Not leaving. But no longer entirely still. The candle flames shrank to thin blue cores. The temple bell rope swayed overhead though the air remained still. And in the space between one heartbeat and the next, Anan understood that the ritual had passed beyond symbol, beyond tradition, beyond the comfort of belief. She was not returning. She was arriving. And she knew him.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 11. Whispers beneath his skin. Her eyes remained fixed on him. They did not blink. They did not harden. They watched with a still, patient awareness that felt older than grief and deeper than recognition, as if she were not merely seeing him, but remembering the shape of him from the inside. The pavilion seemed to shrink around them. Anan could hear nothing now except his own pulse and the faint, uneven rhythm of breath forming where no breath should exist. The white thread looped around his wrist tightened again. A slow warmth traveled along it. Not warmth returned. Warmth taken, shaped, and sent back altered. The mist crept higher, brushing the platform and curling around his ankles like cold silk. The candle flames guttered and shrank, their light paling to thin halos barely strong enough to hold back the surrounding dark. Her lips moved. No sound emerged. Yet something brushed the inside of his ear. You left. The whisper did not travel through air. It surfaced inside his skull. His throat tightened. I was a child, he tried to say, but the words felt thick, foreign, as though speech itself resisted leaving him. Her gaze did not soften. The rain came, you did not. A memory forced its way upward. Swollen fields under monsoon skies, the smell of mud and crushed grass, a girl standing barefoot in rising water, laughing as thunder rolled across the valley. He squeezed his eyes shut. The memory did not fade. It sharpened. The thread pulsed. A second rhythm joined his heartbeat, slower, deeper, patient. Her fingers moved beneath the cloth again, testing the ring as though reacquainting themselves with weight, with possession. The coffin did not open further. Yet her presence expanded, filling the pavilion in subtle pressure waves that made the air feel denser with each passing second. Behind him, someone whimpered before smothering the sound. The monk remained bowed, unmoving, as if even witnessing had become dangerous. "I called you." The whisper formed beneath his thoughts. The river rose. The road disappeared. I waited until the water reached my chest. The images flooded him without mercy. Dark water swallowing reeds. Lightning tearing open the sky. Her voice carried away by wind and rain before he could answer. His breath staggered. "That was long ago," he whispered hoarsely. Her eyes did not change. "Time did not pass for me." A pressure began behind his sternum, not pain, but fullness, as though something inside him shifted to make room. The cold that had hollowed his chest now deepened, spreading outward through his ribs and shoulders. He felt her breath, not against his skin, but within the hollow space beneath his lungs. Slow, patient, learning the rhythm of him. The thread tightened further. He tried to loosen it. His fingers would not obey. The fibers felt damp now, as though drawn through rain-soaked soil. The mist thickened around the platform, brushing the hem of the burial cloth. It moved in slow currents that seemed to follow the rhythm inside his chest. Her lips parted again. This time a sound emerged, thin, fragile, yet unmistakably shaped by voice. "Stay." The single word trembled through the pavilion like a ripple across still water. His heartbeat faltered. He felt something shift beneath his skin, a faint, crawling coolness traveling along his ribs, across his collarbone, into his throat. He swallowed hard. The sensation remained. Not invasive. Not violent. Intimate. As though unseen fingers traced the inside of his bones, learning their shape. Behind his eyes, images surfaced that were not his own. Dark cloth pressed over struggling breath. Hands forcing silence. Soil falling in heavy clumps. The weight of earth before the last light vanished. He staggered. The thread jerked taut. Her gaze sharpened. Not anger. Recognition of shared memory. "I did not leave you," he whispered, though he no longer knew whether he spoke to her, to the villagers, or to the hollow expanding inside his chest. Her eyes softened, not with forgiveness, but with acceptance. "You came back." The whisper resonated through him like distant thunder beneath the ground. The candle flames shrank further, thin blue tongues trembling against the dark. The air grew colder. Yet beneath the cold, a strange warmth gathered, not comfort, not life, but the closeness of something that refused to remain separate. Her hand lifted slightly beneath the cloth. The ring glimmered faintly. The thread pulsed. And the hollow within his chest answered. For a moment, Anan could not tell which breath belonged to him. The temple bell rope swayed overhead, though no wind stirred. A low resonance rolled through the earth beneath the pavilion, not a sound heard with ears, but a vibration felt in bone and marrow. Her lips moved again. No sound followed. Yet the whisper formed clearly within him. "Now you will not leave." His pulse slowed. The cold spread deeper. The hollow inside him widened to receive what had waited too long to remain alone. And as the candle flames flickered toward extinction, Anan understood with growing terror that the ritual was no longer binding two lives. It was erasing the boundary between them. Chapter 12. The Village That Pretends Not to See. Dawn arrived without birdsong. A thin gray light spread across Ban Phra Kham, flattening color and draining depth from the landscape. The teak trees stood motionless against the pale sky, their leaves unmoving, as if the wind had forgotten the path back to the valley. By the time the first light reached the temple courtyard, the pavilion stood empty. The candles had burned down to hardened pools of wax. The mist had withdrawn into the ground. The ceremonial thread that had bound wrist to coffin lay coiled neatly beside the platform, dry and pale, as though it had never touched damp earth. The coffin lid was closed. No one lingered. No one spoke of the night. Anan did not remember leaving the pavilion. He only remembered standing beneath the dim candlelight, her eyes, the whisper beneath his skin, and the hollow space inside his chest that no longer felt empty. Now he stood outside his childhood home, barefoot in the cool morning dust, unsure how long he had been there. The door stood open. He was certain he had closed it. Inside, the air smelled faintly of jasmine layered over damp soil. Women passed along the road carrying baskets of rice husks. They did not greet him. They did not look surprised to see him standing outside at dawn. Their eyes lowered respectfully, not in mourning, not in avoidance, but in a quiet acknowledgement of something that no longer required explanation. A boy ran past chasing a stray chicken. He slowed when he saw Anan, then continued on without speaking, his gaze fixed somewhere just beside Anan's shoulder. No one looked directly at him. No one asked about the night. The village had resumed its rhythm. Or something resembling it. Inside the house, a second indentation marked the sleeping mat beside his own. The woven fibers were still slightly compressed, as if weight had rested there moments earlier. He touched the spot. Cold seeped into his fingertips. Not the chill of morning air. A deeper cold, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth. In the water jar near the altar, the surface trembled faintly though the room remained still. Ripples spread outward, slow and deliberate, as if something beneath the surface had exhaled. He stepped back. The ripples ceased. The water stilled. Yet the smell lingered. When he stepped outside again, the sky had brightened to a washed-out white. Smoke rose from cooking fires and thin, reluctant threads. Somewhere in the distance, a hammer struck wood, a familiar sound that felt strangely rehearsed. As though the village were reminding itself how morning should sound. The temple bell rang once. A short, dull note. No echo followed. At the well, two women paused their conversation as he approached. Their voices did not lower, they simply stopped, as though sound itself had been folded away. One of them extended a ladle toward him without meeting his eyes. "For strength," she said softly. Her voice held no curiosity. Only acceptance. He drank. The water tasted faintly metallic. And beneath it, damp soil. He returned the ladle. Neither woman looked up. As he walked back toward the temple path, he became aware of something subtle but constant, the sensation of breath near his shoulder. Not touching. Not warm. But present. When he paused, it paused. When he moved, it moved. The space beside him no longer felt empty. At the temple courtyard, the pavilion had already been dismantled. Bamboo poles lay stacked neatly against the wall. The ground where the coffin had rested appeared darker than the surrounding earth. As if rain had fallen only in that small circle. The elderly monk swept fallen jasmine petals into a shallow basket. He did not look surprised to see Anan. "It is done," the monk said. The words carried no relief. Only completion. Anan opened his mouth to speak, but the question dissolved before forming. What could be asked now that the boundary between vow and consequence had been crossed? The monk continued sweeping. "Some unions," he said quietly, "are meant to release the dead." He gathered the last of the petals. "And some," he added, "are meant to house them." A breeze moved through the courtyard. The first since nightfall. The teak leaves rustled faintly, uncertainly, as if testing whether movement was permitted again. For a brief moment, the air warmed. Then the warmth thinned, replaced by the familiar coolness that now lingered beneath Anan's ribs. He became aware of a faint pressure against his back, not weight. Not touch, but proximity. The sensation of someone standing close enough to share breath. He did not turn. He knew. From the temple eaves, a wind chime rang. One note. Clear. Unanswered. The monk lifted the basket of petals and walked away without farewell. Anan remained in the courtyard, staring at the darkened circle of earth where the coffin had stood. Behind his eyes, memories stirred that were no longer entirely his own, monsoon rain against skin. The weight of silence beneath soil. The slow patience of waiting without time. The space beside him remained occupied. The breath at his shoulder did not fade. And as the village resumed its quiet motions around him, Anan understood with growing certainty that nothing in Ban Fra Com had returned to normal. It had merely chosen not to see.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 13. The Night of Blood and Memory. That evening, the sky darkened too quickly. Clouds gathered without wind, sealing the valley beneath a low, unmoving ceiling of gray. The air felt dense and metallic, pressing against the skin with the promise of rain that never fell. By sunset, Ban Fra Com had retreated indoors. Doors closed softly, lanterns were shielded, voices faded into the cautious hush of a village that had learned when not to disturb the dark. Anan remained seated inside his childhood home, watching the last light drain through the slats of the wooden walls. He was not alone. The awareness had settled into certainty now, the faint breath at his shoulder, the hollow coolness beneath his ribs, the subtle displacement of air beside him when he moved. She did not touch. She remained. The first drop of blood appeared on his palm without warning. He stared at it. A dark bead swelling from the center of his skin. No cut. No wound. Another drop formed beside it. Then another, welling slowly as though pushed upward from beneath rather than spilling from above. A metallic scent filled the room. He staggered to the basin and plunged his hands into water. The surface rippled violently, though his hands remained still. The water clouded briefly, then cleared. The blood was gone. But the metallic scent lingered. And beneath it, damp soil. A pressure began behind his eyes. Not pain. Wait. Images surfaced without invitation. Hands gripping his wrists, not his hands. Cloth forced over his mouth, not his breath. Earth striking skin in heavy clumps, not his burial. His lungs seized. He staggered backward, knocking into the wooden wall. The room tilted. The air thickened. And then he was no longer standing in his house. Rain hammered the ground. Cold water soaked through silk and skin alike. Mud sucked at bare feet struggling against it. Lightning split the sky, illuminating faces above him, shadowed, tense, refusing to meet his eyes. Her eyes. He saw through them. He felt her chest strain for breath beneath the weight of cloth and hands. The smell of wet earth filled her mouth. Her voice tried to rise, swallowed by rain and thunder. A ring slipped from her fingers into the mud. Someone cursed. Someone pressed harder. Darkness surged inward. Anan collapsed onto the floor, gasping. The house returned around him, dim walls, faint lantern light, the still surface of the basin. His hands trembled violently. His chest burned with borrowed suffocation. He tasted soil at the back of his throat. The whisper formed beneath his skin. They said the rain would hide it. His pulse thundered. I saw, he rasped. The air beside him shifted. A cold pressure leaned close. Not touching, yet impossibly near. You feel it now. Her voice did not accuse. It remembered. Outside, a dog began to howl. The sound rose sharp and desperate before cutting off mid-breath. Silence rushed in behind it. The lantern flame flickered. The temperature dropped. Anan staggered upright and moved toward the doorway. The village lay beneath a dim wash of moonlight filtered through unmoving clouds. No one walked the paths. No voices drifted from the houses. Yet the ground beyond the threshold appeared darker in patches, as if rain had fallen in scattered circles. He stepped onto the dirt. The soil beneath his feet felt damp. Freshly turned. At the edge of the path, he saw it. A faint trail of footprints leading toward the temple. Bare. Small. Each filled with darker earth. The prints ended abruptly after several steps, as though the walker had been lifted from the ground. His breath trembled. The air at his shoulder cooled further. I could not stand. The whisper formed within him. The pressure behind his eyes returned. This time the vision did not consume him. It bled slowly into the present. He saw the temple path layered with memory. Rain falling where none fell now, mud pooling in depressions that lay dry beneath his feet, shadows moving where no bodies stood. He felt the weight of hands forcing him down. He heard the dull impact of soil striking cloth. He smelled the suffocating closeness of wet earth sealing light away. His knees weakened. The space beneath his ribs hollowed further, making room for breath that was not entirely his own. At the temple courtyard, the darkened circle of earth remained visible even in the dim light. The air there felt colder, denser. As he approached, the soil within the circle shifted slightly, settling inward with a soft, granular sigh. Not collapse. Adjustment. As if something below had turned. The whisper came again, closer now. They buried my voice. His throat tightened. He sank to his knees at the edge of the darkened soil. I hear you, he said, the words leaving him without thought. The earth exhaled a faint, damp scent of rain and crushed jasmine. The hollow inside his chest answered with a slow, unfamiliar breath. Behind him, the temple bell rope swayed once. No wind stirred. A low resonance moved through the ground, vibrating up through his bones and into the hollow space within his ribs. Not a sound. A remembering. The pressure inside his skull eased. The rain-soaked visions receded. But the memory did not leave. It remained, layered beneath his own thoughts, patient and enduring. He understood now. What had been done to her was no longer confined to the past. It lived within him. Shared. Circulating. Waiting to be completed. As he rose unsteadily, the night seemed darker than before. The path back to the village thinner, as though distance had stretched in subtle defiance. The breath at his shoulder remained. The hollow within his chest deepened. And as the temple courtyard settled back into silence, Anan understood that the ritual had not ended with the binding. It had only begun the remembering. Chapter 14. The Final Rite of Union. The temple bell rang before midnight. Only once. A dull, hollow tone that seemed to sink into the earth rather than travel through the air. Anan did not remember deciding to return to the courtyard. His feet carried him along the narrow path through the teak shadows, past silent houses and shuttered windows, toward the circle of darkened soil that waited beneath the pale wash of clouded moonlight. The village slept. Or pretended to. No lanterns burned. No voices stirred. Only the faint chime of metal from distant eaves, sounding at irregular intervals like submerged bells calling through deep water. Mist gathered low along the ground, thicker than before, pooling around the temple steps and creeping across the courtyard in pale, slow-moving currents. The bamboo pavilion had not been rebuilt. Yet at the center of the darkened earth stood the coffin. It had not been there at dusk. Its lacquered surface absorbed the moonlight, appearing darker than the surrounding night. Gold vine patterns traced its lid, their curves faintly visible like roots pressing upward through soil. The air tightened as he approached. Cold seeped through his ribs, filling the hollow space within his chest. The presence at his shoulder drew closer. Not behind him. Beside him. You came. The voice formed within him, not carried through air. He stopped at the edge of the darkened circle. The mist parted slightly, as though granting passage. The ceremonial thread lay coiled atop the coffin lid, its pale fibers damp and faintly stained, as if drawn through rain-soaked earth. A faint vibration pulsed through the ground beneath his feet. Slow. Patient. Answering something deep below. The lid shifted. Not forced. Not sudden. A soft release, as though the wood no longer resisted opening. It lifted gradually, revealing layered white cloth within, no longer pristine, but faintly marked with the brown memory of soil. Her hand emerged first. The ring caught a dim glint of moonlight. Her fingers flexed, stronger now, certain of motion. Then she rose. Not standing. Not fully leaving the coffin. But lifting with deliberate grace, as if buoyed by unseen water. Her burial cloth fell in soft folds around her shoulders. Damp strands of dark hair clung to her temples. The scent of jasmine drifted outward, fresh and immediate, threaded with the deeper breath of rain-soaked earth. Her eyes found his. They no longer held the distant depth of the dead. They held presence. Recognition sharpened by return. The mist climbed to the height of the coffin's edge, swirling around her form in slow currents. The temperature dropped. Anan's breath emerged in pale clouds, The hollow within his chest expanded, answering the rhythm that pulsed from the ground below. "You remember," she said softly. This time the sound traveled through the air, fragile but real, vibrating in the space between them. "I remember," he answered, though he did not know when the certainty had replaced his fear. The ceremonial thread lifted from the lid. Not by wind. It drifted upward, pale and damp, moving with slow intention until it brushed his wrist. The fibers tightened. Cold traveled along their length. She extended her hand. Not reaching. Waiting. The monk's voice drifted from the darkness beyond the courtyard. Unseen. The vow must be sealed. Breath to breath, life to silence. The words seemed older than language, heavy with repetition across generations. The mist thickened. The earth beneath his feet vibrated faintly, as though something deep below shifted to listen. Anan stepped forward. The circle of darkened soil felt soft beneath his weight. Her hand met his. This time, her touch was not hollow. It carried weight, temperature, presence that blurred the boundary between flesh and absence. The thread tightened further, binding wrist to wrist. The air grew denser. Sound receded. Even his own pulse seemed distant. Her face tilted upward. Her breath brushed his lips, cool, carrying rain and crushed jasmine. "Stay," she whispered. Not a plea. A completion. Behind his ribs, something opened wider, making space for breath that did not belong solely to him. The temple bell rope swayed overhead. No wind moved. The mist swirled. The earth exhaled a damp, subterranean breath. He leaned forward. Their foreheads touched. Cold flowed into warmth. Warmth flowed into cold. The exchange was slow, deliberate, not theft, not surrender, but a joining that erased the boundary between giving and receiving. The hollow within his chest filled with unfamiliar breath. Her fingers tightened around his. The thread pulsed like a living vein. Then her lips met his. They were cool, tasting faintly of rain. The world narrowed to contact, to breath shared in the space between heartbeats. The earth vibrated beneath them. The mist surged upward. And for a moment outside of time, Anan could not tell whether he was inhaling or being breathed. When he opened his eyes, the courtyard lay silent. The coffin stood open. The mist receded slowly into the soil. The ceremonial thread loosened and slipped free, falling soundlessly to the ground. Malai's form remained before him, neither solid nor fading, present in a way that defied the certainty of sight. Her fingers slid from his. Not leaving. Resting. The hollow within his chest no longer felt empty. It felt shared. From beyond the courtyard, the monk's voice murmured, "It is finished." Yet the word did not bring relief. Only completion. The temple bell rang once more. The sound sank into the earth. And in the stillness that followed, Anan understood that the final rite had not ended the bond between living and dead. It had made it permanent.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 15. The Husband of the Dead. Morning came slowly to Ban Phra Kham. A thin veil of mist lingered among the teak trunks, dissolving only when the first pale light touched the upper leaves. The village resumed its careful rhythm, doors sliding open, rice being rinsed in metal bowls, the muted thud of pestles striking grain. Life continued. It always did. Yet something in the air felt altered, not broken, not wrong, but adjusted, as if the world had shifted its weight during the night and settled into a new balance. Anan woke before the sun fully cleared the hills. He did not remember lying down. He lay on the sleeping mat in his childhood home, facing the wall where the wood had darkened with decades of humidity and smoke. The room carried the faint scent of jasmine layered over damp earth, no longer sharp, no longer unfamiliar, but woven gently into the air. He inhaled. The breath felt full, not hollow. Shared. Beside him, the mat was indented. Not deeply. Just enough to suggest presence. The woven fibers were cool beneath his fingers. He did not pull his hand away. Outside, a rooster crowed hesitantly, as though testing whether morning was permitted to begin. At the water jar, The surface remained perfectly still. No unexplained ripples. No metallic scent. When he drank, the water tasted clean. Yet beneath its clarity lingered a faint sweetness. Jasmine carried in memory rather than scent. He did not question it. When he stepped into the road, villagers moved past him with quiet nods. No one asked questions. No one spoke of the temple courtyard, of the coffin that appeared and vanished, of the mist that gathered without wind. A woman sweeping her doorway paused and pressed her palms together in greeting. Her eyes did not linger on his face. They rested briefly on the empty space beside him. Then she resumed sweeping. At the well, the incense seller sat cross-legged beside her tray. Her clouded eyes lifted as he approached. For a long moment, she studied him. Then she gave a slow, knowing nod. "She is no longer waiting," she said. Her voice carried neither relief nor sorrow. Only acknowledgement. Anan bowed slightly. "I know." The old woman smiled, a thin curve of lips shaped by time and understanding, and returned to arranging her bundles of incense. The temple courtyard bore no sign of the night before. The bamboo pavilion was gone. The darkened circle of earth had lightened to match the surrounding ground. The bell rope hung still. Only a few crushed jasmine petals remained caught between the wooden planks. Their scent long faded. The elderly monk swept fallen leaves near the steps. When he saw Anan, he inclined his head. "It is quiet," the monk said. "Yes," Anan answered. The monk studied him carefully. "Quiet does not mean empty." Anan felt the faint breath at his shoulder. Steady and familiar. "No," he said, "it does not." Days passed. The village returned to its routines with practiced ease. Children's laughter reappeared along the dusty paths. Smoke rose steadily from cooking fires. The wind found its way back through the teak leaves, stirring them into soft, whispering motion. Yet Anan noticed small adjustments in the world around him. Dogs did not bark when he passed. Wind chimes rang once in his wake, though the air remained still. And each night, as he lay upon the sleeping mat, the space beside him grew cool before settling into a shared warmth that required no touch. He began to speak aloud without realizing it. Not long conversations. Only quiet remarks offered into the stillness. "The rain will come early this year. The mango tree survived the dry season. I fixed the loose board near the door." Silence followed each statement. But it was no longer an empty silence. It listened. Sometimes, in the moments between waking and sleep, he felt fingers brush lightly across his palm, a memory of touch rather than contact. The sensation carried no chill, no hunger, no demand. Only presence. Only recognition. Months later, a traveling merchant passing through the valley asked why Anan had never remarried. The villagers exchanged brief glances before one of the elders answered simply, "He is not alone." The merchant laughed politely, assuming humor. No one corrected him. On certain evenings, when mist gathered low along the temple path and the sky darkened with the promise of rain, Anan walked to the courtyard and stood in the place where the coffin had rested. He listened to the wind moving through teak leaves. He breathed the faint sweetness carried beneath the damp scent of soil. He felt the quiet presence beside him, neither shadow nor form, but something enduring and patient. "I am here," he would say. And though no voice answered, the hollow beneath his ribs filled with a slow, familiar breath. In Ban Phra Kam, they still perform marriages for the dead. Not from superstition. Not from fear. But from the understanding that unfinished vows do not disappear. They wait. They linger in rain-soaked soil and in spoken promises. They move softly through the spaces between breath and memory. And sometimes, when the living return to complete what was left undone, the boundary between worlds does not close. It opens just wide enough for two to remain where one once stood. On nights when the wind chimes ring without wind and the scent of jasmine drifts through the dark, the villagers close their doors early and speak in lowered voices. Not out of terror. Out of respect. For somewhere in the quiet spaces of Ban Phra Kam walks a man who keeps his vows. And beside him, unseen yet never absent, walks the bride who no longer waits. In Ban Fra Calm, the wind still carries the faint scent of jasmine after nightfall. The villagers no longer speak of the wedding beneath the temple pavilion. They do not need to. Some bonds do not end with breath. Some vows do not fade with time. And when mist gathers along the temple path and wind chimes ring without wind, the people close their doors, not from fear, but from respect. For somewhere in the quiet darkness walks a husband who kept his promise. And the bride who no longer waits.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.